How's everyone doing? Thank you for joining myself, Jeff Black, Brandon DeCruz for another episode of Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to talk episode 26, the impact of food, palatability, and food variety on hunger and our drive to eat. But I think we probably should talk about how our last week's been because we like to keep you guys things consistent. We're just consistent people. But Brandon, how was your last 7 days, sir? Was it filled with mediocrity or was it filled with consistency?
No, honestly, if we look at a comparison between this week and last week, where I was stuck in airports, I was losing luggage and my personal belongings, stressed out with canceled flights and stuff, this has been a much better week to say the least. So it's been an incredibly busy yet productive week on my end. This past week was actually, and I didn't get to recap this because we kind of went in very quickly to last week's episode. But it was actually my final active dieting week within this year's fat loss phase. And the reason for that was my main shoot of the season was scheduled for last Friday. So in the early part of last week, actually, after we wrapped up, I had been going through the carbohydrate depletion portion of the week. I did like a mock peak week, essentially, almost like I would do for, back when I used to compete, and that I do for a lot of my top or my upper tier shoots. And considering that this was a gym photo shoot, a fitness shoot for a magazine, I decided to prepare in a very similar manner. And I also like just like experimenting with different strategies that I'm then able to, collect data on myself and then also apply to my clients as well. And since I have, a good amount of people in prep right now, I figured might as well me be the test dummy. So I did a carb depletion phase, and then I did a fat load to refill my intramuscular triglyceride stores, which is something that I got from the good doctor Scott Stevenson. He had walked me through that back in the day, and intramuscular triglycerides only account for about 1 to 3% of muscle volume, but it's still that extra edge. And really, when you're trying to get the most out of your physique, these are the little details. I always say, when you're an advanced trainee or you are an advanced athlete, a competitor, it's that attention to details that make all the difference. So this is really what I have to do at this point to peak my physique. But then I followed that up with a 2 day back-to-back carb refeed prior to the shoot because I just, I wanted to fill out my muscle glycogen stores so that I could be fuller for the shoot. And then the shoot was on Friday. Was a gym shoot, and luckily, I really got fortunate with the photographer that I worked with, that he's actually close friends with the new owner of the gym facility that we went to. So almost like, if it was almost like I went to your gym, Jeff, that they
Really?
yeah, so they closed down part of the gym for me to be able to set up lighting. We set up all different lighting fixtures. It was really, oftentimes when you go to a gym, you pay them for access, but it's, whoever's there. You know what I mean? You'll have people in the background. You'll have whatever lighting that they have. They really gave us a dedicated section, which I was very fortunate for. So
That's
we were
cool.
able to, yeah, we were able to close down a portion of the gym and set up lights and then get the shots we were really looking for. And overall, the shoot went extremely well. I'm honestly really happy. I'm someone that I'm very critical of myself, both from a physical and a mental perspective. I'm, as with many of us, I have a type A personality and we're kind of perfectionists. And I'm pretty critical in terms of, my critiques of myself in terms of my physique. But I was really happy with the conditioning I was able to attain for the shoot. And I was really able to, this was pretty much my target the entire fat loss phase. I was trying to get down to, these levels of essential body fat that I really haven't been at since 2020, and that was prior to getting in that car accident and prior to my multiple surgeries last summer that kind of like, sidelined me. So it was really important. Often people ask me like, what was my goal? And it really was just to push myself to be the best version of myself, and best version meaning like get back to pre-accident, pre-surgery conditioning levels.
Mhm.
That's what I'm known for. I'm known for, being a very good dieter, a very experienced dieter. And I just really wanted to push myself. And honestly, I've had to push myself within this dieting phase, probably more than any other, just because there was physical, mental setbacks, a lot of business. My business has grown, multiple fold over the course of the last 4 or 5 months that I went out on my own. And so just being able to manage all that, was something that was a different experience. But I really, I do something particular with every shoot. So, at this point, I've done, I want to say, well over 100 professional photo shoots. And one thing that I like to do after all these photo shoots, especially my main target shoot, so in this case, this was my main target shoot, is I like to get the photographer to send me back all the raw, unedited images. And that way I can truly analyze my physique and assess the photos without any editing. Because, once it goes to the editor or they edit it themselves, obviously there's some deviations and there's some clearing things up, and makes it you look a little bit better than you normally would. And we all know that. You look on social media, these are highly edited photos that you're seeing of your favorite influencer, your favorite professional bodybuilder or competitor or fitness influencer. And so this weekend I looked at all the raw unedited photos and I looked them over, and I got to say my conditioning was on point. I'm very happy with that. But I did turn up a little bit flat, despite, I carb loaded with about 1,300 carbs over the course of those 2 days. So at this point, really what I'm starting to do, I started yesterday, was reversing out of the diet itself. So getting out of the deficit, and I'm going to strategically increase my calorie intake, and especially predominantly from carbohydrate intake over the course of the next few weeks as I head into the rest of the shoots for the season. But I got to say, the one thing that I love about these dieting phases, whether they be a contest prep or a photo shoot prep or just a regular fat loss phase, are the physical and mental lessons that I learn along the way, because they teach and provide me with so many lessons that, and just different teachings that I can then apply to myself in the future, and then also with my clients. And I always find that dieting phases have undoubtedly taught me how to be a lot more strategic, especially with time management. That's something that a lot of people overlook. Like when you start adding things to the equation, extra steps, extra cardio, more I guess strategic and rigorous meal prep. Like these are things that are time consuming, but we have to realize that we have to integrate both fitness, nutrition, and in this case, bodybuilding into our lives, because none of us are making a career out of this, for the most part. Most listeners out there, like this is, I always tell even my clients that are athletes, that are professionals like Anthony or, Arturo, or many of the pros that I work with, or the competitive amateurs that I work with, I always say bodybuilding or fitness, in the case of my general population clients, it's a component of your life. It isn't your life. You know what I mean? It isn't your entirety. And even for people like myself or you, that we make a full-time career out of this, we make it out of the business of bodybuilding, the business of fitness, not from the competing or the dieting or the photo shoots themselves. These are just cherries on top. So it's really integral, and it's especially crucial to be able to integrate, these different components of fitness and making them an attainable part of our lifestyle. So, I always realize, and I always try to do the best I can to embrace the dieting phase, regardless of the suffering that it takes and the hunger and all that kind of stuff. And I really look to just check off the boxes needed to progress my physique, while also really focusing on making sure that I maintain the quality of my work, the positive impact that I have on my clients. I'm able to contribute to my family, to my community, and that I maintain all my responsibilities outside of my fitness training and, the photo shoots or the competing, because that's a big thing that I've seen competitors make a mistake of in the past, or other models that I know, that they let everything else fall by the wayside. And then once the shoot is done or once the show is done, it's like now they have to pick up all the pieces. And I've been very fortunate in my approach that I've always kept things in a really good place. And honestly, I actually become generally more productive. I take on more podcasts. I do more educational things during the course of a diet, because I'm just zoned in and I'm so time oriented. Cardio is going to be done at this time. Steps are going to be done at this time. My workouts are going to be done at this time. I'm going to eat at these times. Client emails and updates are going to be done at such and such times. And so it overall has a really positive impact on my life. And that's something that I would especially encourage those out there that are embracing or taking on the dieting phase, or any phase, whether it be your off season, or, just take some strategies and let them add to your life rather than take away from it. But Jeff, I'm really excited to hear about your weekend, because I know that you held quite a special event with one of our good friends, Jason Theobald, over at your gym this weekend. So tell me all about it, my man.
Yeah, man. So like my last week has been good. I'm actually on a wait list for in-person coaching. I just haven't said anything because I think that's corny as shit when people post that for that kind of stuff. That's just me. I'm like, just file away that you're getting clients and just communicate with them, because people appreciate that. You know what I mean? And that's just what I've always done. But anyway, Friday, I like my Friday nights, man. Me and Keegan watch SmackDown.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, so like that's become like a bonding thing with us. And then Saturday, yeah, I had Jason come in town. Him and Arya, his girlfriend, were here. They stayed with us. It's always cool to see Keegan understand how to show a person a house. The house guest around, like he shows them where the towels are at, and all the things like that, teaching them how to be a good
He's
host
a great
one
host.
day. Yeah, exactly.
Host.
But they hung out with us, and then Saturday we had the new ethics event. I got to see my our good friend Tristan Winters from the Daily Pursuit. He was in town with his whole team, and there were a lot of other people I met. Got to see Zeb with New Ethics. Got to see Vince Pit Stick. Nice to catch up with old Vince. What can I say? I love my conversations with Vince. They're always so vast and deep. And then we got to present, and that was a live stream event. Jason talked about like the adrenal cortisol dominant athlete, and I was supposed to do a presentation on sales, like talking to people how to get average Joes and average Jans to buy the product. The last minute decision was made because of the hurricane to go to like a live stream, so I had to pivot out of mine, and instead I talked about trench warfare. So I went with that on that. Yeah, it's still doing that, B. Just so you know. Like, I just gotta let you know that.
Thanks, brother. Sounds kind of odd.
Yeah, no, I think it's the mic. So, guys, if my mic sounds weird or anything like that, please let me know. It could be my voice, but it does bleep recording right now. That much I'm able to see. So hopefully right. If not, you guys get a tarnished episode. But anyway, I ended up talking about trench warfare, and it was because I was doing 75 hard. And when you get to phase 3, you have to go talk to 3 strangers a day. And so what I was doing, and I was going through like Publix, the mall, places like that, and asking people like what they thought a trainer, a nutritionist, or a coach was. And B, I swear to God, of all the people I talked to, maybe 2 in the 30 days had a slight clue of what we do for a living. And what I mean by that, like the metrics involved. And that's my argument. Like, we're always on social media talking about like releasing all this educational content, but no one's taking the time to be a leader with educational content in their local community. So like that local leadership group that I joined last year and graduated from, or in 2020, they actually asked me to present. Like, I present before, I think, city council, all these people here in a couple of weeks. And I'm talking about the effects that stress have on the body. Like that's impact, right? Like, it's educational impact. It's making yourself an authority within your community. So I was encouraging people to start talking to people in, their communities, to be able to go out there and get their clients to build their business. Because if you were to go out every day and talk to a couple of people over the course of a month, you'd probably be able to easily get some people interested in what you do, or at least following you to start the process. And so mine was just more of a call to arms to, use the supplements do work. It's a great brand. I support the brand. I love the work that Jason and all them do. They had a great Vince presented on the manufacturing side of the supplement industry, which B, I know you've talked to me about before. So that was interesting to hear his take. But overall, I just encourage people, if you're a coach listening to this, just go start talking to people that you see in the stores, man. Those are the people who are getting sicker, who are getting more infertile. Those are the people who need more help. It's great to look awesome on social media without your shirt, but you'd be surprised how many people really have great conversations with you and don't even know that they need to get 10,000 steps a day, or have no clue why they should even drink a gallon of water a day when you talk to them. And Brandon, this will shock you the shit out of you. Well, it shocked me. Maybe not you. Most people actually think of a trainer or a coach as an advocate coach, or a It Wraps Works coach, or like someone that would work at Planet Fitness holding a clipboard, or like a high school coach. So I said, people don't really realize like the depth of what we do with manipulating macronutrients, understanding micronutrients, why they would even want to take their temperature, especially if they're female, to understand if they're ovulating, or why they would take their blood glucose numbers. Like, staggering numbers of people don't even know this basics. So it makes me wonder, like, are we really doing the job we need to do to really turn the tide against obesity by just posting on social media? Because that's safe. Like, going out and having conversations with people in public is hard. And that was what I was expressing to everybody. So a lot of people said it hit really good. So I don't know. I had a good time. Sunday, hung a TV outside. Now I can watch football outside. I'm going to make my back porch a sunroom. I began that project here in the next month. So Big Pappy's having a big life. What can I say?
Good stuff, man. I'm glad to hear it. Listen, dude, I don't think it's recording on my end.
I swear to God it is. We're about to find out. If it doesn't, then we're redoing it. I'll know at the end of this. So you guys are listening. You guys get like behind the scenes raw combo going on.
I'm looking at it saying it's recording you. It's not recording me. But hopefully it is.
Both. If not me, then the audience just gets one conversation, point perspective, dead silence for minutes on
on my end. So hopefully I'm just paranoid and it just looks weird on my end for Zoom. But
it probably does.
It's interesting that you bring that up because actually there was just a recent study that came out. And a few years ago, they did a meta analysis and a systematic review on the metabolic health of the United States. And we know that generally up to 70% of Americans are overweight, but they did a critical analysis looking at the metabolic syndrome criteria. So that is not only looking at BMI, so body fat, body mass index, it is looking at triglycerides, it's looking at fasted blood glucose, it's looking at um, you know, cholesterol markers and different indices of metabolic health and obesity or body fat or body composition. And they saw that, or they found that only 8% of Americans are can be considered metabolically healthy. And here's the thing, the parameters in which they used aren't really that high. So it was like making sure you had under 100 milligrams per deciliter fasted blood glucose. It was under 150 in terms of milligrams per deciliter for triglycerides. So these aren't really high. These aren't like optimal. These are within reference range, lab ranges for these metabolic parameters. And it's just really shocking, like how unhealthy our society and our,
Yeah.
nation is. You know what I mean? Just due to the Western diet, and it's unfortunate. But really, we often speak about the fact that this industry is extremely saturated,
Yeah.
and it is saturated, but it's not saturated with great people that truly care. So that, oftentimes it's a lot of people yelling the same message or fighting within themselves. Like we spoke about last week, like food quality versus food quantity. We have a ton of people within the nutrition sphere that they just argue against each other and just kind of yell their messages and use social media to like uh, propagate their messages or their one-sided, narrow-minded viewpoint. And it's like, listen, just be more open-minded and be willing to help as many people as possible. And a lot of people take such a narrow-minded focus where they want to create camps, and that really isolates a lot of people that don't, you know, it's almost like what I would consider nutritional tribalism. Like people want to belong to something, but they also want to isolate other people out that don't share the same beliefs as them. And so I really think that a lot of people within the lifestyle and general population, genres or groups, they don't get an attraction to fitness because they feel like they have to become, one with the group. And it's not something that's all inviting and it's enticing to them. And it's just, if we can lower the barrier for entry for this industry, where we make it so that people realize the utility, the benefit of nutrition coaching, of improving their lifestyle, their habits, their behaviors, I really think that we could help more people. And it's often like what you say about like the blue ocean. Like, there's so many people out there that really do need help and that we need to be able to help. But also, it's not only due to us not targeting them, but it's also due to a lack of interest on their end. And it's also because they think that it's like this high standard of entry
It-
to work with a nutrition coach, when in reality, it's something that many of them need. And nutrition is especially, it's something that I've really focused on because I often find that nutrition is the number one bottleneck within someone's life that's holding them back from having the body composition and health status that they want. However, the issue with nutrition is everyone eats. And that's both a positive and a negative. So everyone eats. So everyone is our target population. However, because everyone eats, everyone has an opinion about food. And many cannot differentiate the fact that they don't have the education and the nutritional literacy on nutrition to guide them in a way that's going to move them closer to their health and fitness goals.
Yeah, I think that that's probably why I don't announce I have a wait list or things like that, because I understand from owning a gym how hard it is for people to take the first step to actually go to a gym, like to reach out to a coach or anybody about their health fitness, because it's a pride thing, man. You don't want to have to reach out to someone and be like, hey, I don't fucking understand this. Some people don't have a problem,
Mhm.
but a lot of people do have a problem with it. And that's the bridge we have to cross.
But here's the thing. So this is how I try to, analogize, because I often speak in analogies, especially to my lifestyle clients. And I often tell them, like, listen, you are, so for instance, I was just speaking to one of my clients who's a surgeon. And so she was saying how it's been really hard for her to come to a nutrition coach and not only have to work with a nutrition coach during a fat loss phase, but also in the maintenance. But that's where she struggles most. So I was reinforcing the fact that your issue really isn't with dieting itself. You do have some issues with your relationship with food and with macronutrient tracking and things of that sort. And we've worked on that, but it's more the habits and behaviors that you both use during the diet and then after the diet. So that's really my focus with her. And she had made a comment how she found it difficult initially when she first started working with me with the concept of having a coach both during the diet and after the diet, because in her history and her past, she only used a coach to get lean, and then she discarded the service. And she realizes the utility of it now, because now we've went through consecutive fat loss and maintenance phases, fat loss, reverse dieting, and maintenance phases where she's been successful throughout the course of us working together. But in previous years, she used to think that was crazy. And I kind of flipped the situation on her and I said, listen, did you ever think about it through the context of this? You would hire someone for fat loss and then you would leave them, or you would stop the program, or you would stop the template they were following, or the app. And then you automatically, or you very quickly regain the weight that you had lost. And then you had to reinvest into a program again, or to a supplement, fix, or
Yeah.
a detox. So you were constantly reinvesting in the fat loss phase itself. Now we've done much less frequent fat loss phases. However, you've not only gotten better results than you ever got in the past, but you've also maintained them. So let's flip your viewpoint or your perspective on this, and also let's look at the fact of this. You're a surgeon, correct? So we were talking about it, and I said, when you have an issue with your car,
I
do you think
identify as a
twice?
surgeon. Yes.
Yeah. Jeff the
Yeah.
Jeff the doctor. So she's a doctor. She's a brilliant woman. And I said, listen, you know so much about the human body and about your scope of practice, correct?
Yeah.
However, if you were to need a knee surgery, would you do it on yourself? And she's like, absolutely not. I said, because that's, first of all, you wouldn't perform surgery on yourself.
Right. It's
And second of all,
ludicrous.
you wouldn't, that's not your scope of practice, because she's a cardiologist. So she does heart surgery. So she's not going to go into a knee and do a MCL or an ACL repair. And then I brought it to the fact of her car. I said, do you ever hesitate when your car needs a tune up, or, you need a new battery in your car? Are you changing that out, or are you going to a professional? And she said, no, absolutely not. I mean, I couldn't get it to work if I did it myself. I said, exactly. So just like you keep up with your car and you keep up with your body in terms of the repair that you do, you also have to think of your body as something that you need to do maintenance on. And so that could come from a nutritional point of view, or getting help with training, with your lifestyle, with stuff like that. And so stop viewing it in the fact that you think that having a coach is a crutch, and view it as something that you're outsourcing to a professional that can, shorten your learning curve and really help advance your ability to make progress and maintain that progress, just like you would in any other capacity of life. I said, when it comes to be tax time, I hope you're certainly not taking the time out of your day to do your own taxes. You have an accountant, correct? And, obviously she said yes. And so we have to get people into the mindset that if they're willing to invest on other areas of their life, whether it's on frivolous things or necessary things like their investments, their finances, their car, their maintenance of their house, plumbing, electricity, all that kind of stuff, be willing to invest in your body and on the knowledge that you get from a paid professional that has spent their life, like you and I have spent our lives, cultivating and accumulating knowledge and working with people one-on-one, and then being able to apply that to people in the real world. So it's something that we could really help shorten the learning curve for whatever client that comes to us.
That's very, very true. And speaking of which, I think it's probably time we get in our topic. That was a good debate, though. I like that conversation. We today are going to talk about the food topic is food palatability. So basically, B, I'm gonna let you take that one and get going, because I know you've got a spitfire from the fire or whatever saying. I'm lost on words there. Mumble, mumble.
Absolutely, my man. So, on the past two episodes, we've spoken about both nutritional strategies to manage hunger on a diet, as well as the importance of food quality and food selection when our goal is fat loss. So, today we wanted to expand upon the topic of food palatability and how it impacts and influences both our appetite, so our hunger, and our calorie intake, especially in the context of a fat loss phase, because this is where people struggle most with their ability to adhere to a diet because of hunger. And although energy balance is what matters most when it comes to losing body fat, part of the energy balance equation is controlling how much food we eat and our calorie intake, which can be dictated and heavily influenced by the palatability of our food choices. So, palatability, just as a refresher to the audience or anyone that didn't listen to two episodes ago, we did cover this on episode 23 very briefly. Palatability refers to how pleasurable and rewarding the food we eat is. And here's the thing, guys, the unfortunate truth about food is the more pleasurable, the more delicious and enjoyable a food is, the more of it
It's
we will be
true.
likely to consume. So the more we like a food, the more likely we are to overeat it, which can easily and really derail our ability to adhere to our diet, maintain a calorie deficit, and make progress with our physiques. So essentially, when we look at our food choices, we need to take into consideration the fact that tastier foods, like hyperpalatable foods or processed foods, are going to cause us to be more likely to eat more calories just to feel satiated. So, on today's episode, we're going to cover all things related to food palatability, the hedonic reward of foods, and hyperpalatable foods so that those in our audience can make better decisions with their food selection in order to better adhere to their diets, as one of the most important components of a diet are to be consistent and adherent to it. However, our food choices and the palatability of those food choices can play a large role in how difficult or easy it is to remain consistent and adhere to our calorie budget and macro targets.
So, do you want to go into then, I guess, what is food palatability? Like, do you want to break that down a little bit for people so they can kind of understand? Because it sounds like a blanket term. Are you meaning something more specific than that, or how are you wanting to phrase that so we can have a general consensus for what that will mean throughout our conversation today?
Yeah, so food palatability, like I said, it really just refers to how pleasurable and rewarding the food we eat is. And so the pleasure response that we get from food. And then it also ties into our next topic, which is going to
The
be the
hedonic
hedonic
reward.
reward of food. And that's
Yeah.
really where palatability really strongly ties in. So I'll say when it comes to understanding the hedonic reward of food, when new clients first come to me and say they've been struggling for years, either with their nutrition or with being able to lose fat and keep it off, I always do what's called an intake of their nutritional habits, and then I also do an audit of their calorie intake. And I often find two common characteristics in those who struggle with their nutrition, especially when their goal is to get lean and remain lean. And Jeff, I'm sure you're going to hear these and be like, dude, I encounter the exact same things. But two of the things I find most frequently are these individuals that struggle with dieting and with getting lean and remaining lean is their food choices center around highly palatable items that may taste delicious but leave them hungry and which they find difficult to moderate their intake of, and they also eat for reasons other than actual true physiological hunger, and usually it's for these hedonic reasons. So you
Right.
know really, if we explain that to the audience, like if you guys haven't heard of hedonic eating or non-homeostatic eating, it's pretty much eating that isn't out of necessity or due to an actual need for energy or calories. So hedonic eating is usually done to derive pleasure from food or due to desire, such as when you eat to satisfy a craving, or say like you're stressed out, you've had a really long day at the office, you've had a bad day at work, and then you come home and you turn to chocolate and cookies as comfort food to temporarily make you feel better. That is an example of hedonic eating. And one of the primary reasons the majority of our country is out of shape and metabolically unhealthy, like I covered, in the intro, is because the majority of the time that people eat in our society, it's done hedonistically, meaning we eat to fulfill a craving. We eat to fulfill a desire. We want a taste for, or we have a taste for something. We eat because of a social occasion, or we eat because we're emotional. So, say we're experiencing emotion like stress or boredom or sadness. And so we eat due to those reasons rather than actually relying on our own hunger cues and letting that decide when we eat and how much we eat. So we're not eating for what's called homeostatic reasons, which means for true physiological need for energy. And what I usually find with most people who come to me who have struggled with diets in the past are they're coming from a place where they've been eating a large variety of hyperpalatable foods that are pleasurable to eat and trigger a reward mechanism in the brain. And so with hyperpalatable foods, what they often cause is they include like combinations of, say, refined sugar, salt, and fat, and they cause a large release of dopamine when they're consumed. So, on top of the fact that these foods are very calorically dense and take a large amount to reach satiety, so we got to eat a lot of calories to get full with them. They often really, result in overconsumption. So they also cause us to develop a tolerance or a threshold to them. So this threshold results in less and less dopamine being released when eating these foods, which increases our drive to eat more of them to trigger that same pleasure response that we originally got from them. So if you guys ever notice, like you take a bite of a cookie, like a brand new cookie, and it tastes amazing. And so the next time you eat that, it might take more of those same cookies to get that same type of
It's
release,
true.
especially if you acclimate yourself over time. And that's why generally you'll notice with hyperpalatable foods, like, you might start with an Oreo, but you don't finish with one Oreo. I don't know anyone that's moderated their intake at one Oreo. Like it's usually a sleeve or a whole container. And so these food sources, especially hyperpalatable food sources in particular, they affect our brain in a similar way that drugs do actually. So if we actually look at like drugs and stimulants, they work, yeah, and these foods, they work on what's called the dopaminergic system, which downregulates over time. And seeing as
Uh-huh.
dopamine is this motivating chemical, it makes it hard to give these foods up if we're constantly exposing ourselves to them and eating them. And an easy way to think about hyperpalatable foods and the effect that they have on us is to think how you've responded to caffeine or even coffee in the past. At first, say you first expose yourself and you haven't had coffee in a long time, or you haven't had a particular energy drink or a stimulant or a pre-workout in a long period of time, or it's the first time you're trying them, you get a positive effect from a small dose. But over time, your system down regulates and your tolerance goes up, where you need more coffee or energy drinks or pre-workout just to elicit a noticeable effect and get a benefit from it. And so in this case, due to this tolerable or this tolerance that we develop, what I often do when I have these clients who struggle with this come to me is I start them out with a more nutrient dense whole food source diet rather than the energy dense processed food sources that they've been eating, because whole, minimally processed single ingredient foods include both more micronutrient value, and they tend to be less palatable, so they don't drive this passive overconsumption. So this helps rewire our ability to stop hedonically eating and eat more for homeostatic reasons, because we're getting less of a pleasure response from whole foods, but also they're more satiating. So it comes back to that energy density and that satiety index that we spoke about on the last two episodes. So when you swap out some of these hyperpalatable foods for less palatable, more whole single ingredient foods, you're able to moderate your intake and be more in line with your body's energy needs.
I don't want to clarify anything there. I think that was pretty good. Why do you think then? Okay, so do you want to touch on the next point we have to talk about is why it's so hard for us to moderate the hyperpalatable foods? Do you want to clean up anything there or point anything else? I can say this. I've learned, and I don't know, I think a lot of audience members will probably laugh about this. Like Brandon said, it doesn't begin with just one Oreo. No one eats just one damn Oreo.
It's like Lay's. Bet you can't just have one.
Yeah, but there's some truth to, like, as you age, you just can't process things like you want to. Like, I know if I have more than 2 slices of pizza, I'm sitting up for 6 hours with heartburn. Like, I can't eat that anywhere close to bed. But yet, once I eat something like that, like, all I think about for the next 4 hours is like, I wonder what other shit I can go get and throw down the hatchet. And, it's very interesting because you have the whole talk, like neuroinflammation is becoming a big thing now, as you've seen, because people's in their gut health and stuff like that. But I've just found that whenever I eat too far off, like it's almost like the cleanup effect is so miserable. It's like, it's the equivalent to me of drinking. Like if I go out and I drink a few bourbons, I know for 3 days I'm not going to feel my best. Like, you know what I mean? It usually takes that long for me.
There's like a residual.
Yeah. And then you do those hyperpalatable foods. The problem is once you do it once, the next time you go back to it, it's like, well, I mean, I did a sleeve of Oreos. 2 won't be that much worse. You know what I mean? And before you know it, you've done some just horrible shit. And you're like,
you're up in the ante.
Yeah. You're like trying to cry about it. Dude, last week we interviewed this competitive eater on the Excellence Cartel, man. And hearing that he competed in classic physique and ate like just these crazy eating contests and just what he would do. So he'll literally starve, like barely eat throughout the day. And then for an hour, eat whatever he wants. That's how he diets for a show. It was fun. Dude, he'll eat whatever. Like, I mean, like he was like, I mean, I tried to keep it clean, but by the end, and I'm like, yeah, once that hyper palatable food hits, yeah, but dude, so like, I think maybe you remember this back in the day. You remember when we used to do the Dave Palumbo, all the coaches were giving out the Dave Palumbo diet, and then they'd be like, you can have a cheat meal once a week. And then it was like, you could eat whatever you want for an hour. I remember they were like near like 4 weeks out from the show. I'd go to like Burger King, McDonald's, Chick-fil-A. I'd get home with like 4 different items and just would eat among them all for an hour. And I put on like 8 pounds. It was like the dumbest shit I would do to myself. And then I was so miserable because the next day I was so hungry and all I could think about was that food that I just tell people, I'm like, it's weird code that your body, nutrition's code to me. Like you said, everybody eats.
In 2014, during one of my first preps, I worked with a coach that you're very familiar with. I won't name him because I have a lot of respect for him, but he even admits that this was wrong due to me and to other clients. But he followed his mentor in coaching was Scott Abel. Do you remember Scott Abel?
Yeah, Beyond Metabolism, Scott Abel, right? Abel, yeah.
So Scott Abel back in the day was one of the first people that came out with. I've actually disproven a lot of the stuff that he came to the market with, especially like metabolic damage. He was one of the first guys that ever coined that term. And so what Scott Abel used to promote and what his strategy was called the cycle diet. And it's very similar to skip loading, if anyone knows Skip Hill from back in the day on the forums. A little bit different in the context, but you go through a very large energy deficit 6 days per week, and then you have a what did he call it? Like a refill day. It was like a refeed day, but it was really just like a binge day, to be honest with you. And so on the last day, you would have of the cycle, you would quote unquote revamp your metabolism by eating as much as possible. So within the context of that day, you were supposed to eat as much as you could. And it was supposed to be, restaurant meals. It was supposed to be get as many calories. There wasn't any like specific, obviously there was a lot of wanted a lot of refined carbohydrates. So he would say like fig Newtons. My coach in particular was like do sleeves of rice cakes and stuff. So generally I kept it fairly low fat, moderate protein, and very, very high carbs. We're talking, 1,200 plus grams of carbs just on that day, but I was under 100 grams of carbs Monday through Saturday. So it just reinforced like this really unhealthy behavior with food where you were essentially under eating and under fueling during the week and then over fueling on that Sunday. And you just felt terrible from a digestion perspective. But I saw a lot of people utilize that. And there was also guys that used to promote. Now, in Scott's defense, it wasn't a cheat day. It was a lot of calories, but it was supposed to be mostly whole foods. You could do a restaurant meal at the end of the day, but you had to wait until your last meal of the day to do like a processed meal. You know what I mean? During the course of the day, it was like do protein pancakes or do low fat muffins, or it was really like kind of like the
Right.
Chris Aceto type of approach where it was very high carbohydrates, low fat, moderate protein. So it was more of a refeed, like a let's, with the thought at the time, like let's, spike up leptin, which we now know takes multiple days to actually increase leptin
Yeah.
levels and leptin concentrations. But at the time they thought that it would restoke the metabolism. However, there was other people at that same time, 2013, 2014, and I'm sure you remember this, that used to do the 24-hour cheat meals, cheat days essentially.
Yeah.
And I remember individuals doing it to such a degree that they would set their alarm for 12:01 and they would wake up. Jeff, I don't know if you had anyone in your life like this, but I had competitors that I knew in the gyms that I went to that would wake up at 12:01 and start eating ice cream and stuff. And I remember I went to um a bodybuilding expo in New York in 2013, and Juan Morel was doing one of those 24-hour cheat days. And during the expo himself, he was trying to get so many calories in that he went down to a Baskin Robbins and asked them for one of those, like where Baskin Robbins serves the ice cream out of, like one of those big, it's like a gallon or more container. And he brought it to the expo. He brought it back to the booth and started eating out of it. So it was just like people were doing things at that time that made absolutely no sense. And a lot of times, we think success leaves clues, but often, with professional athletes, what we have to realize is that a lot of them get results in spite of what they do, not because of what they do. And so now we know so much more about the metabolism, about refeeding, about diet breaks, and things of that sort, that we really know that those things aren't efficacious, nor are they a good from a what's called a neurobiology of food perspective, meaning the reinforcement that we get from foods. And really, when it comes down to it, if your goal is fat loss, this isn't to say like you guys can't eat hyperpalatable foods, but if your goal is fat loss, you're doing yourself a disservice if you make a proportion or a predominant amount of your food sources during a calorie deficit from hyperpalatable foods. And the reason for that is that the overconsumption of calories, especially in the form of hyperpalatable processed foods, is one of the number one reasons so many people are at a higher body fat
Yep.
percentage than they'd like to be at. And that is healthy for them. And the issue in today's modern food environment is we have unlimited access to cheap, refined, and highly processed foods, which increase our drive to eat these items and overconsume calories, thus resulting in body fat gain and the obesity epidemic that we're dealing with today. And I often consult with new clients who come to me and say that they don't know why they can't control themselves when they eat certain foods. And although this is an issue holding them back, many don't realize that we evolved to be this way. So, from an evolutionary perspective, you guys actually look into it, we had what's called optimal foraging strategy. Jeff, have you ever heard of this
No,
from
I've never heard of it.
ancestral biology? So, yeah, from an
Mm.
evolutionary perspective, pretty much our hunter-gatherer ancestors evolved in a way where they were looking for the most amount of calories for the least amount of work. So it was really like maximum return on investment due to the fact that they had limited
Mm.
access to foods. So this caused our brains to develop in a way where they want to get the most amount of calories for the least effort, which is essentially why we're highly drawn to like fast food restaurants and takeout and things of that sort, because we're still, we have to realize that we haven't gotten a software update. We're not like the new Apple iPhone where we get an update every year. Like we're the same, evolutionary perspective. From an evolutionary perspective, our brains are evolved the same way that our hunter-gatherer ancestors are. However, we're in a completely different environment, which is why, the food environment is so influential on our calorie intake and our food choices. And so the issue here is that, our ancestors never had access to hyperpalatable food sources. So the likelihood of them over consuming food to the point of gaining excess body fat was highly unlikely due to the calorie density perspective of the foods they ate. And also because they didn't have unlimited food access or food availability like we have today. Like everywhere you go, there's a grocery store, there is a
It's
fast
true.
food joint, there's a convenience store. We can get food anywhere we go. You even go to like, like I was getting my oil change the other day, and they had chips in the repair shop. You know what I mean? Like you could buy chips, soda, like anything. Like I could get hundreds of calories for a couple dollars within the span of seconds. Like I did no work for it. Think about it like from an evolutionary perspective. We used to have to go out into the wilderness and hunt our food and gather our food and expend calories to gain calories. However, now we generally can just order Uber Eats, or we order something to go. We expend no calories and we consume a massive amount of calories. And that really, it's this evolutionary mismatch where we're often overeating the amount of calories we're taking in per day, but under expending calories needed to burn off the amount that we're eating. And so, for example, like if we actually look into like evolutionary history, the most calorie laden food available that was generally available to hunter gatherers was honey, which has about 3.4 calories per gram. Whereas nowadays, we now have food on the shelves every single day with an energy density that's 3 times that amount per gram. So we never were meant to be exposed to these type of hyperpalatable foods, which is why they're such a big issue today and why so many people struggle with moderating them.
Yeah, that's like my thing. I'm like, man, like if you've seen what's going on in India since they've like introduced like all our Western foods over there, like the obesity rate in India, because they'll drink Pepsi because it's safer for them to drink than the water.
Mhm.
Like it's just crazy, like how good we've got it, and we bitch about stuff over here, and I'm like, oof. But
We
overall, it's a
actually
bad
see
thing.
that in all areas that have become more westernized. So even when,
Yeah.
if you look at like, for instance, I went to I've spoken with Stan Efferding multiple times at seminars and different events I've went to. Also, I wrote with him for Alan Aragon's research review a few months ago, and his wife, I believe, is from Samoa, and her country was an area where there was really lean individuals. They were all extremely athletic. Like if we think of Samoans, think of the Rock. It's like those genetics, like large, muscular, lean
Mhm.
individuals. And he said that when they got more westernized and they had more access, like they were getting more shipping from the United States and from other countries, they actually turned to being from really metabolically healthy to inducing a ton of insulin resistance because they weren't used to highly processed, refined foods. And so they've actually flipped the paradigm of the overall health of countries like that because of their exposure to more that westernized diet, which is why we have like the expression the sad diet, the standard American diet. That is one that is, high in refined sugars, high in refined fats, oils, things of that sort, and it really isn't good for our health. And that's why we have so many, health ratings that we're looking at by 2030. Over 50% of the population will have diabetes or a form of
Yeah.
diabetes. And over the life course, over 50% of Americans will have some form of diabetes, most likely type 2 diabetes, which is more nutrition dependent than genetics dependent. We see that people that if your parents had, if we look at the genetics of type 2 diabetes, and I'm interested in this because my dad was a diabetic, we're at a 4 times higher predisposition. If your parents had diabetes, of had type 2 diabetes, we're at 4 times a higher predisposition towards type 2 diabetes during our life course. But then that gets exacerbated by the environment. So we're talking about genetics, so we're talking about nature, then we look at nurture, and just the modern food environment is predisposing around 50% of us to getting diabetes. So we have to realize that we have to really be very selective with our food choices. And this doesn't just come down to like the concept of a fat loss phase. Like obviously that is for more of an aesthetic goal, and that's what many people come to us for. But also I'm trying to improve, a lot of my clients' health, and they have high fasted blood glucose readings. They have high fasting insulin. They have markers that aren't metabolically healthy. They're showing signs of potential metabolic syndrome later in life. And so I'm addressing them on both ends. I'm improving their body composition. I'm getting them into a leaner body fat
It's true.
percentage, leaner physique, but I'm also improving their metabolic health through the process of fat loss and through modulating and modifying their dietary habits and their food choices.
Let's get on to the last two before we run out of time and our audience goes, what the fuck? Research on how food palatability impacts our calorie intake. I'll actually be curious to hear what the research is on this because, often sometimes the research doesn't align to what you know to be in the trenches at all. So I'm interested to see what you have on that.
Honestly, I think that most of the research that we have on food palatability is really in line with what we see as coaches.
Oh, okay, cool. That's neat to know.
With what we've noticed both in our own lives, with even, because this is something that you and I both have struggled with previously. Like when we've done If It Fits Your Macros diets, we've struggled with hunger. Like we've noticed that during the context of a fat loss phase, it's hard to moderate our intake of these foods because they essentially hijack our appetite and they
Yeah.
also influence us to eat more and receive less fullness and satiety from these food sources. So I really think that a lot of this research is in line, and I wish that more people would highlight it. So I'm going to dig deep on two studies that I found extremely interesting and applicable to our audience. But in general, there's been numerous studies done on food palatability and how it impacts and influences the amount of calories we eat at a meal and across the course of the day. So one of the best examples of this is a study that was done by DeCastro et al. And in this study, they took a group of almost 600 participants and tracked their food intake over the course of a week, and they analyzed the palatability of their meals and ranked them from low palatability meals to high palatability meals based on the food sources that made up those meals. And what they found was that when meals were highly palatable, subjects consumed 44% more calories than when meals were lower in palatability. And also that when subjects were able to self-select the meals they ate, so they gave them options within what meals that they could eat. At times they self-selected for them, or at times they selected for them, and at other times they let them select them based on the other meals that they had had throughout the course of the week. When they were able to select their own meals, they always ate. They always chose to have the highly palatable meals rather than the low palatable meals. So meaning like they had a drive to now eat more. They had already eaten more calories from those highly palatable meals either that day or in the days previous to that, but they were driven more to re-get those meals, or they were to re-eat those food sources. So it shows, like, I don't want to say the addictive nature, but the habitual nature, like these re-ingrain and reinforce these bad eating behaviors. And then another study by Rising looked at food intake measured by an automated food selection system. So in this study, they took 10 lean men and put them in a metabolic ward. So this was completely controlled. They were able to monitor their body weight, their calorie intake, everything. And after finding the subject's maintenance calories, they allowed them to have access both to regular meals, but then also they had a vending machine that consisted of highly processed foods. Now, throughout the course of the study, they did not tell the men what to eat. They gave them a baseline diet and then allowed them access to these vending machines. However, they were not told what they should eat or how much they should eat. It was based on ad libitum food intake and based on their hunger. So on average, the male subjects ended up eating over 1,600 calories more per day than their initial maintenance diet that they had been given. And throughout the course of the study, they gained 5 pounds of fat due to their increased drive to overeat. So in both of these lines of research, it shows that these individuals were driven to overeat due to the fact that highly palatable foods are more rewarding and drive consumption, and they're also more calorie dense and less satiating. So you're going to be more likely to overeat calories and gain body fat as a result. So the more palatable a food is, the less full we get from it. So we'll need to eat more just to get satiated from it. And we see that in other research, such as by Kevin Hall, which we discussed in last week's episode, when we spoke about the study that compared participants eating processed versus minimally processed foods in a diet, where they ate on an average of 500 plus calories per day when the diet was comprised of highly processed foods, as compared to when they ate minimally processed foods and actually underate by 500 calories per day. So we see this massive discrepancy in the research, and then also in the real world. Like if you were ever to, I've never seen someone that's overconsumed like chicken breast and rice. You know what I mean? Like they need 1,600 calories more. You know what I mean? Like if their maintenance calories were 3,000, I don't see them overeating an extra, 1,600 calories from 400 grams of protein worth of chicken. Like we just don't see that. However, it's very easy to do that at a restaurant or with a bag of chips, or you sit
Yeah,
down
dude.
a bag of cookies.
I pointed that out to Keegan when we were at the grocery store Saturday night. Let's point out to the kids. I was like, "Hey, look at that like M&M thing," and it was like everything now when you check out is like king size or double size. Like when we grew up, you used to be able to get like a bag of M&Ms that was like maybe 200 calories. Now it's 220 calories, but it's got 3 servings in it compared to what it used to have. And I was really showing that to him, like, think about that, Keegan. Like, and one night we were at dinner and I pointed out the dessert. I said, that cake right there is 2,200 calories for that piece of cake.
And
you can eat that by yourself. And he's like, yes, I could. And I was like, exactly.
You know what's unfortunate about that is that when we look at food scarcity and we look at like the price of foods, really the price of highly processed foods have not risen much over the years. And actually, in all honesty, if we look at price per ounces, they've actually probably gotten less because more things have come in bulk items. So like you're
Yeah.
talking about, when we were kids, they used to have the small serving sizes where we'd be able to get the candy that was a single serving. Do you remember like the five?
Yeah, like the small stuff. Yeah,
nickel stuff. So we could get like a piece of gum or a piece of,
Yeah.
sour candy or something. We don't have that anymore. Everything's in
No.
bulk size. So it pushes us to not only buy in bulk and to have these things around where we expose ourselves to more of these things and want to overeat them, but also our perception of what a serving is highly off. And I see that with many of my clients from different countries, that when they come and visit, and even friends that I have, that when they come and visit the US, they always say our portion sizes are out of control, because at restaurants, we have portion sizes that are much larger than the average person. So we eat more calories on average than most people. We have an obesity epidemic. We also see that the CDC averages, or CDC reports, that the average American gains 1 to 2 pounds per year on the year. So over a course of a decade, we're estimated to gain about 22 pounds for the average American. Yeah. And so we're overeating calories, and it's also due to our food environment, and then also how our food is prepared. More than 50% of people's food intake is prepared outside of the home, meaning that they either get it at a fast food place, they get it at a restaurant, they get it to go, one of those types of preparations. And so we're not moderating our food intake, but we're also being served such larger portions. And often what I try to have a conversation with my clients about is, just because you go to a restaurant and they serve you a full plate and we've been taught to clean up our plates, doesn't mean that that's, just because a restaurant serves you a dinner doesn't mean that that dinner fits your calorie expenditure or your calorie budget. And what we have to realize is men and women are massively different sizes. So when I'm dieting both a male and female client, like sometimes I have, a male that is the husband and he's 220 pounds, but then his wife is 120 pounds. And we have to realize that if they both go out to dinner and order a very similar entree, they're both getting the same size, but it's not like the restaurant says, and goes and says,
Right.
well, let's give a male portion that's more in line with his body weight of being 220 pounds, and then the female portion that's 120 pounds. So what I really find is that when women try to eat the same way as their husbands or the same way as their partners, they often struggle, because for what their husbands are getting away with at a restaurant or the portions, they are those females are drastically overeating in comparison to their energy needs and what they need to maintain a calorie deficit. So we really have to look at things through the context of, what's my energy budget and what is my ability to, eat and maintain my body weight or lose body weight, and think about your total daily energy expenditure as your calorie budget. So how much you burn is how much you can eat and maintain your body weight. And when you want to induce fat loss, we have to be below that energy budget. So if you're not burning more than you're consuming, it doesn't matter what the restaurant served you or what the portion size of a Twinkie or Hostess cupcake is. It matters what your body is going to receive and perceive as a deficit.
Agreed. Now, the last point we need to touch on, because we wrote this out: how hyperpalatable foods hijack our appetite. There's actually some neurobiochemistry involved, or neurochemistry and all that, correct? a lot
It
like
has to do with
ghrelin.
dopamine
Yeah, it
signaling.
has a lot to do with dopamine. Now, I do think, can you touch on real quick? Because I know it's me throwing something at you real quick. The different, you've got ghrelin, you've got, what is it? The CKY. There's another hunger signal cue that goes on. There's a couple of them that goes on in the hormone responses. Is ghrelin responsible for part of this hijacking? Because ghrelin's a sexy hormone that everybody talks about.
No, so ghrelins are main hunger hormone, and that's
Mhm.
generally regulated by our food intake, by our level. So it's both long-term and short-term food intake, meaning our energy status. So short-term would be our calorie intake throughout the course of the day. Then long-term would be our body fat storage. Then
Fair.
also ghrelin is regulated by our meal patterning. So we actually see that the largest elevations and concentrations of ghrelin rise about 30 to 60 minutes before our regular eating patterns. So we actually can
Yeah.
re-entrain those. If you ever notice, guys, that you normally get hungry before breakfast, before lunch, you almost can time your meals by the times that you get hungry without even looking at your clock or your watch. And I know this because I'm very habitual with my eating schedule. I already know what time it is an hour in advance because of my hunger signaling. But what we do notice is that that is based off a circadian rhythm, and appetite actually works off of your circadian rhythm. So we can essentially entrain our hunger patterns. And with that, what can end up happening is this is why people can shift to a fasting, like an intermittent fasting type of diet. And after the first couple of
Mhm.
weeks, acclimate to skipping breakfast or skipping dinner, whatever, method of intermittent fasting that they use within the eating window, because ghrelin will re-entrain itself or repattern itself based on your new habitual eating schedule after your body gets acclimated for a period of time. But when it comes to actually food manipulating, hyperpalatable foods manipulating neurochemicals, it really comes off of dopamine. That is the main
Correct.
neurotransmitter that we're talking about. So really, when we look at hyperpalatable foods, these are foods that are so tasty that they send a signal to the brain that bypasses the normal off switch that we have to stop eating, which is what makes it
Mhm.
so hard to regulate our appetite and moderate our calorie intake of these things. And when we actually look at brain imaging studies, they've shown that these foods hit and stimulate the same dopamine release that we see from other substances such as caffeine, nicotine, and even cocaine. So there's a similar seductive, I don't want to say addictive nature, because we actually do have research on food addiction, and it doesn't show to be addictive, but it's almost like the same similar seductive nature to them, where once we have some of it, we'll want more of it, just like we do with caffeine, just like we do with nicotine, just like people do with illicit drugs. And the issue is processing foods can take a whole food that's naturally satiating and filling and make it much less satiating once it becomes processed and hyperpalatable. So if we look at an example, I love looking at this example. Like, let's look at a plain potato. When we look at the research on the satiety index of foods, a plain potato has been shown to be the most satiating carb source in the research, and is shown, it's a food source that very few people would overeat on because it's so filling. It has water, it has fiber, it's very low energy density, so low amount of calories per gram, and it's going to be highly satiating. So it's not something that's super palatable and is going to be easy to overeat if you just eat it plain. However, let's look at the potato in the context of a few deviations to it. So say that we fried and we make it to a crunchy texture like in a fry, and then we add some salt and oil to it, and then we add some condiments, some ketchup, or different barbecue sauce, and then we put some cheese on it. All of a sudden, we have a plate of cheese fries, which you need a whole lot of more calories of. And the same overeating phenomenon can be said when we look at or when we eat potato chips or potato skins as compared to potatoes. They both come from the same base food, which is the potato, but adding different flavors and additives to them and then processing them and making them more hyperpalatable drives our calorie intake of these items. And we can look at so many other examples of this. We even look at our ability to eat like dried fruit as compared to whole fruits. We look at, nut butter compared to, regular raw almonds or raw nuts. And it's just these different processing and the palatability of these foods that really influences our ad libitum or our natural intake of these foods. So really your food selection, your food choices can make or break your ability to not only get satiated and full from a food, but also to adhere to the calorie deficit that you need to induce fat loss. So really, guys, like the whole context or the whole intention behind this podcast wasn't to demonize food, but to really shed light on the influence that hyperpalatable foods can have on you. So if you guys do want to include these into your diet, by all means, but don't make the majority. Like, this is why I'm not a big fan. I'm a fan of flexible dieting from the mindset perspective of being flexible and not looking at food through this black and white context. However, I'm not a fan of the general if it fits your macros approach, where it's let's fit as many fun and tasty foods as possible, because I notice that that is a recipe for disaster for many people, especially those within the lifestyle population that don't have a good nutritional awareness. They're not hitting their micronutrient needs, as we talked about in last week's podcast. So they're micronutrient deficient. And then also, they're having a hard time because they're coming from a background where they're used to over consuming these hyperpalatable foods. And then when they go into a dieting phase, they look to just use portion control. And really, what portion control of hyperpalatable foods does is it just lowers the amount of food and the food volume that you get from these items. They make them even less satiating, and it drives your not only your hunger and your appetite, but your desire to overeat these foods just to feel a satiety response. Whereas if you kind of, modulate the palatability of your foods and you switch to more simple single ingredient food items and make the majority of your diet out of that, say a 90-10 rule, where 90% of your foods come from minimally processed whole foods that are highly filling, highly satiating, and nutrient dense, packs micronutrients, gives a lot of bang for its buck, and provides a lot of satiety per calorie, you're going to be much more likely to not only adhere to your diet, but to succeed in it in terms of both losing fat and maintaining fat in the long course. And that's really what we're about in this podcast.
Man, I think it was a good conversation because like I tell people, like, food has no moral compass. There's no such thing as like good food, bad food. Like Oreo cookies aren't sitting there like hanging out behind a tree like a Jehovah's Witness going like, oh yeah, I can't wait for you to get inside your home so I can ring the doorbell. Get in there. It's not doing that. And I just don't think people understand what it really does to you. And there's, for like you said, for every gimme, there's a gotcha. And that's what you always say. I use it now and everything. I curse your Jersey self for that. But nonetheless, dude, I think it was very well presented. I hope that you recorded. We will soon find out. So if you all are listening and it just sounds like a lot of silence and not Brandon talking, then you guys missed out on a hell of an episode, and it'll just be silence and just random little tidbits of information. But dude, guys, actually, why I have your all's attention real quick. Be sure to hit B and I up with some topics you guys would like for us to talk about. You guys do a great job, but if there's some other stuff, any guests, maybe you guys that you feel are authorities on stuff that you would like us to bring on and have conversations with, whether it be bring back on Ed Helms, or bring back on Dr. Campbell or Lauren or John Jewett, or anyone you guys are interested, let us know. We like to have those conversations because we have like a bazillion more episodes to go ahead of us. So it always helps to plan accordingly. And I'm going to make Brandon do a weird one day down the road. You guys are going to log on one day and it's going to be like me with some nerd who we're going to talk about like weird copper and iodine and shit like that. And his Brandon's just going to be over there and be like, what's the research say? Like, it doesn't say shit except this. Because that's the funny thing about copper. It's hilarious.
I'm going to be down a deep rabbit hole before.
Dude, when I'm presenting on copper, I'm talking about this at an online thing. But do you know that there's actually study done with pregnant women and Viagra, but not pregnant women and copper?
I don't even want to know. This just sounds like it's going in a bad direction.
Dude, yeah, it resulted in like fetal deaths and stuff like that, but they've never once studied women taking copper while pregnant. It's not been done. Yeah, like I was like, wow, all right, you know what I mean? So there's your dark, morbid close to this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Brandon's like, weird research out there. I'm like, yes, sir. But B, man, where can everybody find you, dude?
Guys, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at @BrandonDeCruz_ or on my email, which is bdecruzfitness@gmail.com. And guys, please feel free to share this, like it, subscribe to the podcast. We really do appreciate all those. I love when I get interactions and story reshares. We love hearing from the audience, and we really do this for you and for our clients. And so anyone that listens or gets any little nugget out of it, your feedback is always well appreciated. I often get both feedback as well as questions about things. And actually, food palatability was one of the things I got most frequently asked within the last 2 weeks. So is why we went through more of a deep dive on the palatability of foods, which is something that many podcasts don't cover. Like we're trying to go into topics and into the nuances of nutrition that a lot of people don't cover: food selection, food quality, things of that sort. A lot of people just talk about calories and macros and tell you how to set up like this, cookie cutter macro plan that isn't prescribed to you. We're trying to give you real applicable information that can help you become a better critical thinker, increase your nutritional awareness and literacy, and also apply things to both yourself and clients. So we really appreciate everything that you guys do in terms of supporting us. And Jeff, tell them where they can find you.
Hey man, Jeff Unbreakable Black on Instagram. And guys, be sure to leave written reviews on iTunes and give us that little star review on Spotify. That does help us out as well. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it was Bob, Brand. I'll see you all next week. Bye.
Sounds good.